you'll get to see that. Unless you want to be filmed and have your image as part of the recording, I completely understand if everyone wants to turn their cameras off during the presentation. But this workshop today, put on by the Social and Behavioral Sciences workshop series, covers APA references for the 7th edition. So we've held 2 sessions for in-text citations. This is now looking at formatting for references. So I know it's dry material. We try to make it as digestible as possible. My name is Kelsey Vukic. I am a Social Behavioral Sciences librarian. I'm facilitating. And I have Alyssa here who's co-facilitating and managing the chat. So if you have any questions, like she's already said in the chat, feel free to put it there. She's also made it easy and linked the presentation. So the presentation does have live embedded links, so you can always refer back to it to find content that we cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We also have our email address. So if you have follow-up questions, you can always reach out. So I'm going to give a little introduction to APA. Some of this content I did cover in the in-text citation workshop, but it's always good to make sure we cover our bases. Overview of changes to the 7th edition, and then we're going to jump into formatting references. There is an optional activity at the end of the session, just so that you can kind of test yourself to see if you can answer the questions based on kind of the information I presented. And one of the, there's a couple pick the right citation, pick the right reference formatting. And one I pulled directly out of the library's search citation tool. And so, hint, it's the wrong one. So you can see, again, another example where we have to be smarter than computers when we use those citation and reference generators. So a little bit about the APA publication manual. It is published by the American Psychological Association. The 7th edition, which is the most recent edition, was published in 2019, fall of 2019. They hadn't had an update since 2011, so at least they're not, coming out with new editions every 2 to 3 years, making it a little bit easier on us. At least hopefully we can retain all the changes for this one during your time while you're enrolled in your program. It's just going to be me and Alyssa and I who are cursed with having to learn the new editions as they continue on. Maybe hopefully we'll have at least another 10 years before that happens. So APA is the format style that's used by the sciences and social sciences. So if you are in any of these disciplines, you're required to use it. But it essentially sets the rules for how to format your paper. So that can be anything from where page numbers go, what the title page should include, also how you format your sources. So that applies to both in-text citations as well as references, how information is presented, whether in tables or trying to avoid bias in language or reducing bias in language, and just other mechanics of style. So for example, a mechanic of style is 1 space after a period versus 2, which is one of the updates for this edition. Also, the objective of the manual was to provide structure and formatting for publishing in manuscripts. But the new edition does make account or has different caveats for certain formatting for academic or student works. It doesn't apply to references, so we won't dwell on that too much, but there is a concise student version of the APA manual, and I've heard, I don't have it, but I've heard from students that it's pretty easy to use and follow. So if you are looking to invest and you just want to use it as for academic, your academic need, that might be one that you'd want to consider. I don't know how pricing differs, if it's the student version is cheaper or not, but just as an FYI. So I mentioned there's some changes with text formatting, the 1 space after a period. Oh, it's more money. Oh, of course it is. There's 1 space after a period, but there's also more flexibility in the font options you can use. So with the 6th edition, it was largely like mandated Times New Roman 12 point throughout, 12 point font throughout. Now, depending on if your paper is just going to be like submitted or read electronically or online, it recommends using sans serif fonts, and then you can actually use smaller than 12 point font, and then print recommends using serif. So that's, again, going back to classic Times New Roman and 12 point font, or even Georgia 11 point font. So depending on how you're reading the document, I guess one font type is easier to read electronically and the other is easier to read in print. So they make accommodations for that. There's also formatting around figure images as well as computer code, but we're not gonna focus on that too much. Is that across the board? What do you mean across the board?
So what I meant is that like when you're writing up research, like I guess in general, if you use APA, if you're required to use APA, this is available no matter what you're writing up or.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I had mentioned that student papers no longer need to provide a running head. That makes it a little bit easier because I would always encounter students who are having issues like, if I have a running head, it deletes my page number or vice versa. So now for student papers, academic papers, you only need to provide a page number in the upper right-hand corner. Yes, I agree. That is a nice headache relief or headache avoidance now. Another thing APA has done with the new version is made headings a little more, like a little easier or consistent to approach with formatting. There are 5 different levels. First level is center bold title case. That's usually like the title of the paper. And then you might have sections and subsections and that follow the different header levels. They are all bold and all using title case. So with title case, it's the first letter of every word is capitalized. So that you know is consistent across the levels. And then it kind of does like once you get past the second, it italicizes every other. So keep in mind levels 3 and 5 are italicized, and then levels 4 and 5 are indented. So if you get that far into subsections and subsections, you can always refer back to this chart to help remind you of what that formatting should look like. So now we're going to talk about reference lists, the reference list and references in general. So the reference list starts on a new page. It follows the body of your paper and it's actually titled references. So very simple and easy. If you do have an appendix or appendices, you would want to provide the reference list before that section. References follow a who, when, what, where format, and I'll be talking about that a little more in the next couple slides, and we'll see it broken down in our examples. You do want to include all the sources you cite or quote within your paper. The only exceptions are for personal communication or interviews. The idea is everything that should go in your reference list should be retrievable by anyone who encounters your paper. So whether it's for academic, if it's another classmate or your teacher, in theory, like they should be able to access that resource. Even if it's behind a paywall, at least they have all the bibliographic information they need in order to track down that source. So if you have a personal communication or if you've conducted an interview, no one else can retrieve that information. So that's why those are exempt and do not end up in the reference list. You do make a note in your citation that it is a personal communication, but again, it is omitted from the reference list. Your reference list should also list each source in alphabetical order by the first author that's identified in the work. So someone whose surname starts with A is the first reference, and then you go all the way down to Z would be the last reference listed, all in alphabetical order. Also with your references, when you have individuals as authors, you want to provide their last name and then only their first or middle initial, middle if it's provided. So if I write something, I would be Vukic, K. I would not include my first name. You also don't provide any additional like credentials. Sometimes I see people wanting to put in like if the author has a PhD or an MD or any other kind of degree or qualification that can be attached to a name, that you don't actually need to or should include in your reference list. That is omitted. So just author's last name and first middle initial. Another thing I tell students is to pay attention to capitalization. This especially is important if you are using a citation generator or a reference generator, because sometimes just the way that the data is input into these systems, the mechanics or technology behind whatever they do to assemble the reference formatting, it doesn't necessarily change capitalization where appropriate. So for articles and book titles, only the first word of the title and the first word of the subtitle should be capitalized unless there's a proper name or noun. And I'll point this out again when we have some examples later on. I know it's kind of a little abstract when I just state that requirement. Also with journal titles, they follow the title case formatting similar to the headings. And so the first letter of every word should be capitalized unless it's an article. So like the, a, on, something like that of those articles would not be capitalized. Article words. It's hard when it's like article title versus like article, like grammar article. Anyway, another formatting requirement to pay attention to is italics. Book titles, journal titles, and volume numbers of journals should always be italicized in your reference list. Sometimes I see too with copying and pasting, like depending on the word processor, like sometimes it removes all formatting, so it might remove italics when you paste it in. So just make sure that italics are present for those components. Some notable changes in regards to references with the 7th edition. Publisher location is no longer included in a reference. This was usually present for things like books, movies. They would have like the country of origin for movies. So city and state is no longer necessary as a location for referencing books. Also, there's a change. So now with large author groups, if you have a publication with 20 authors, you would have to provide all 20, but once it goes over 21, you do the first 20 and then like you do ... and then the last author. So if you have like 25 authors on a single publication, whoever got slated to be the last 5, or I guess like second to last 4, won't be like, they won't show up in the reference. Also, DOIs are now formatted similarly to URLs, so they should have like a www as part of the DOI number. And so it's no longer required to actually label DOI. You just place it there. You don't have to do DOI : and then a number. So now it just kind of looks like a URL. Also, URLs are no longer preceded by retrieved from. However, if it's significant to provide a retrieve from date, you can do so. This happens with often sources that are updated on a regular basis. So one of the examples that we have on our APA research guide is there's a population count on the census website. And it's just like constantly scrolling of like how many people there are in the United States. So the number would be different if I went in today versus if I go in next week. And so if you are citing a source that's similar to like that type of situation, you would want to provide a retrieve from date because that information is likely to change in the future. So, you know, if whoever's reading your paper wants to go and see that source, like the information that they see on the day that they visit will be different from the day that you capture that information and put it into your writing. Let's see what else. So website name should be included unless it's the same as an author. And then web page titles are now italicized. So that's another thing that's different with the 7th edition. And then additionally for ebooks, you don't need to provide the format, platform, or device that is used. You don't include that in the reference anymore, but the publisher is included now. So that's another change. So I mentioned that references follow a who, when, what, where format. So it's always typically going to follow that same order. Who is identifying who the author is, who created the source. So it might be an individual, a group of individuals. It might be an organization or corporation. There might be editors. So if it's like an edited book, you might be identifying editors and not actually authors. And in some cases, if there is no identifiable author, you then revert back to the title entry in place of a who. Then that kind of moves some things around. But largely, if you have an author, whoever they are, whatever they are, that is identified first as the who. Second, you have when. That's usually the publication date. So for most items that are published, or most academic items, I should say, or traditional academic sources, you just provide the year. So if it's an article, a book chapter, you are just providing the year of publication. So it makes it really simple. If it's something from like a conference, so like a paper or poster presentation at a conference, you would provide the year and then a comma and then the month. And then for publications that are published either like daily or weekly, such as a daily newspaper or a weekly magazine, you would actually, or even like a blog post, you would actually do the full date. So again, you go year first, comma, followed by month, and then the date of the publication. Especially with these things that are published daily, it's easier to locate that exact source when you have the full date. And then again, if there is no date, which is common with websites or some other content, you would do n.d. for no date. So very simple. Now, as far as the what goes, that's usually the title of the source. So it can be identified as an individual source, so an article or a piece from a larger publication. Articles, you want to identify the title rather than just the journal name. The same can be said for title of a newspaper article versus the newspaper name, or web page versus the website name. So mission statement on the APA website is where I'm like referencing versus just if I were to say APA website, in theory, it might be harder for someone to locate that exact information. So giving them kind of more of a roadmap of, I'm pulling this information from the mission statement. That's the title of this source. That makes it a little bit easier. Now, the where is where we see the most variation with this new update. So pretty much anything that's not who, when, what, the rest of information provides kind of falls under this where. So it could be, and it varies for the source type. So for books, it would be publisher. For journal articles, it would include the journal name, volume, issue number, page range, DOI, or the URL. So like sometimes where is just like one single thing. Sometimes where is a collection of things. And so we'll see in our examples of different source types how the where and what is encompassed in the where. And again, on our APA research guide, for each source type, we have the general formatting formula, and then we go in and provide examples of different scenarios. So hopefully, if you're trying to figure out your source, what it should be formatted as, like we have an example that's close enough to help you format. Are there any questions on the who, when, what, where approach to references? And if there's silence, I will take that as no. We also have time for questions later. So if something comes up later, we can also answer questions then. So this first slide is covering books. Books are a common reference source that you often may utilize in academic research or completing academic work. So pretty much the formula or formatting for a book, we have the who is the author, when is your publication. There actually, I don't know if there's a space here. There might be a typo there. But then you have title of work and title. The first word of the title is capitalized. First word of the subtitle is capitalized. Everything else is lowercase. And then we have the publisher. So we see that here with this example. Author, they provide both the first and middle initial. The book was published in 2001, Learning by Heart. By heart is lowercase, and then we have the publisher provided. So books are like, a lot of their references seem so like small and streamlined now. So it's pretty straightforward. Books are like probably the easiest one or the easiest to assemble. When it comes to book chapters, this happens if you're just referencing like a single chapter in an edited work. So each chapter may have a different author. You would cite that individual chapter. Sometimes you might be referencing 3 different chapters out of an edited work, and all 3 chapters have different authors. So you would want to identify first the chapter author or authors, your publication, the title of the chapter. So we see here the title of the chapter is not italicized. And then we also have just the first word of the title capitalized. Everything else is lowercase unless it's a proper name or noun. It is in an edited work, so we also want to identify the editor or editors. Title of the book is italicized. You do here provide the page range for that particular chapter and then the publisher. So again, we see that in a real live example, a chapter on philosophy and the science of subjective well-being, and it's coming out of the science of subjective well-being, and it's the page range is provided. So book chapter, it kind of like adds on to formatting of books, but it's still pretty straightforward. We have our who, when, what, and where.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Kelsey? And I think you probably covered this. I know we're talking about references right now, but the in-text, you see that how it's for the pages number here, and it's PP period, and then page number to page number.
Yeah.
In text, and I'm sorry because my internet is fading in and out. Maybe you haven't covered it yet, but is that when it's in text, is it one? Oh, I think I know it.
Yeah.
The answer. If it's one page, it's a 1P. If it's more than one, okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Never mind.
Yeah. So even if you had an in-text citation and you had a quote that went from one page to another, you would do PP to indicate it's multiple pages, and then like you do like 12 to 13 as the actual numbers. And so this is the same thing with the references. Because the chapter is more than one page, you do PP to indicate multiple pages, and then you show the full range. So yeah, that's a good question, because I'm sure other people will wonder if we don't address it. Now for ebooks, again, it's very similar up to the publisher, like it's exactly the same, but then you also add either the URL or DOI. So for example, this book comes from one of our ebook databases. And so this refers just back to the database like homepage. Anything that's accessed through a paywall, or like anything you access through the USC libraries, it's like something we pay for and you have to log in order to access it. Typically, you just provide that homepage for that resource, whether it's the journal homepage or the database homepage. But if it's something that's like public or publicly available with not behind a paywall, you'd want to provide the full URL. Although one thing that I don't know if I have in this presentation, but I know that we make a note of on the examples on the research guide, is that now APA actually wants you to condense or shorten really long URLs. So if you are formatting a reference for a source that has a super long URL, it asks you to go to like a bit.ly or a tiny URL website, condense that link, and then put that link in as your URL for your reference. So I just want to mention that too, because I don't think I have it explicitly shown in the presentation. But this is also a nice example, because we can see here, the Equal Rights Amendment is the name of legislation. So we do want to make sure Equal Rights Amendment is capitalized, but everything else that's not the first word of the title or a noun is lowercase. With condensing or shortening a URL, you usually have to go use like an independent or third party web generator. One of the ones or the two that I mentioned are bit.ly, and then the other one is tiny URL. Alyssa, if you could add those links in the chat just to make it easier so that they can kind of check that out, I'd appreciate it. I'm sure there's others. Those are just the two that I use most frequently. Google, like with some of the Google platforms, at least like their docs, they give an option to shorten. So I don't know if some of the databases also have the option to shorten URLs. Hopefully that helps. So the next source type we're going to look at is dissertations or theses. These usually, again, are very similar in formatting. We see who, when, what, and then where. So for like an electronic data or electronic dissertation or theses, we have subscriptions through like ProQuest dissertations. We also, for USC dissertations and theses, since like 2006, we've been digitizing, or they're all submitted electronically. So we have them as part of our digital library collection. But essentially you'd want to provide the author of the dissertation, year of publication, the title, and it looks like I have a little formatting error where the P didn't end up being italicized, but just imagine it's italicized, and I'll fix it later. We have the full title of the dissertation that's italicized. We also provide an order number, and then in brackets, we want to establish that it is a doctoral dissertation versus like a master's thesis, and that it comes out of or is granted or like produced under program in the University of Maryland. And then also identifying it's coming from ProQuest Dissertations and Thesis Global, which is the database that you can access this particular dissertation. Next up is periodicals. So periodical is essentially usually like journal articles. So we see again, I'm repeating myself. We have the who and the when. We have the title of the article, so the what. And then after the title, everything else is where. So authors, title of the article, the where is where it's coming from. So the journal name is italicized. The volume number is italicized. There is no issue number, so we omit it in this case. Otherwise, it would be in parentheses following the 24. We have a page range. We don't have to do P or PP or anything like that, just the number range. And then we have the DOI. So I had mentioned the DOI is now formatted like a URL. So we see that it has like the HTTPS // a DOI-org. This is the proxy from USC libraries. And then this is like the DOI number. So this is a complete full DOI. And usually you can pull this from the article detailed information, like in the abstract section or in the detailed record page of articles. They'll usually list a DOI. So continuing on with references, incorporating the idea like newspapers or a magazine article. So there's different formatting for electronic news article versus a print. So we see here, this is again where the when, we see a little bit of a variation from just year publication. So because the New York Times is published daily, we have the year and then the full date. We have the title of the article, and then we have the title of the newspaper or periodical italicized following that title case. So everything starts with a capital letter. Each word starts with a capital letter. And then again, because this is likely accessed through a paywall, or you have to be a member or have a subscription to access it, we just provide the New York Times's homepage. And then in theory, someone could search for this title, decide to pay to access or log in themselves, and then access this article. For print, again, everything is the same up to where we get to here. So instead of a URL, we're providing the pages. So in this case, again, this article appears on multiple pages, but it's split into different sections. So PP, it starts on A1 and then continues on A4. So you just indicate that as part of your reference. So websites are formatted thusly, or here's the formatting. So author, year publication, title of page, and then site name, as well as the web page URL. So we have, this is coming from the US Census Bureau. This is what I mentioned, the world population clock. I guess I thought it was just the US population clock, but it's actually the world population clock. It's again from the US Department of Commerce. And then I retrieved this data last January, and then I provide the URL. So in this scenario, we see it retrieved by date, but unless it's pretty static, you don't need to include a retrieve by date. You would just have the URL. You wouldn't have from as well. So films changed, or the formatting for films changed. So similar to books, you're no longer providing the country of origin, but you do need to provide the format. Now that we have so many different formats in order to access audiovisual multimedia content, you do want to indicate the format. So for this example, we provide the director, because I wasn't able to identify producers, or producers was unclear. So I've identified DuVernay A as director. It was produced, or it came out in 2016. Title is italicized, and then I've indicated that it's a DVD. If you have like a video blog, or example like a YouTube, instead of like the company that produced it or the production company, you would have the URL and indicate that it came from YouTube. So again, there's a variation in the date because this was posted on a specific day. You put that full date as well. TED Talks on YouTube are very, so there's, okay. So I'm trying to recall correctly, and I think we have an example on our website. So if it's posted by TED Talk on YouTube, TED Talk actually like gets credit as the author or like whoever their username, like whoever published it. And then you would have the title of the talk with the individual's name. However, if you are referencing a TED Talk that's on like the TED Talk website, you would have whoever is the speaker identified in the like the author in the who section, and then just the title of their work. So let me go to the next link. So we actually have the link to the APA style guide, and I can show you. And oh, Alyssa has it.
I added the page because we actually have both of those examples. Yes. On the page.
So that's why I wanted to have that caveat, because if it is a TED Talk on YouTube that you access, TED actually gets credit as the who, and then you, as the subtitle, it's the speaker of the TED Talk. But if it's directly from TED Talk's website, you provide the speaker of the TED Talk as the who, and then they're still part of the title, but then the subtitle is their talk title. And you indicate that it came from TED conferences, and then you provide the TED link. So there is that difference in variation. So again, depending on where you're accessing it, it may change a bit. But as you can see, we have so many different examples on our website that we try to cover different scenarios. I got asked a question about podcasts in our in-text citation. And in that case, like the host is the who, because we had talked about like author, creator. In that case, like the host of the podcast is the who. For motion pictures, it's usually director. So here we see different possible formatting, and it doesn't necessarily dictate the medium, but you kind of have to like go through and evaluate for yourself too, to figure out like, is it a host? Is it a director? Is it a writer? Oh, and this is also part of a greater whole. So like there's, say, a movie versus like an episode of a TV show. So like my example for that, we have like the TV series of My So-Called Life, but then a single episode from The Office, you would want, you would format and give credit a little bit differently. So yes, thank you for that question. It does seem very relevant to other people on the workshop today. I went through all of the different examples. The rest of the presentation or the slide deck is just links to other APA resources and our reference activity in case anyone wants to kind of quiz themselves and see if they can identify the correct formatting for a couple different reference types. And then otherwise, the last slide is just questions again with our information. So I'll pause on this slide, and I think we can probably stop the recording too, so you don't have to.